After Ys 5, much like Kevin, the Kingdom of Sand itself, the Ys series went missing for a long time. 8 years might not seem so long, especially after how long the last console generation lasted, but after Adol's last adventure on the Super Nintendo, we wouldn't really see him again until halfway into the PlayStation 2's lifecycle. And it's even worse if you were a fan of the series living outside of Japan. Outside of Japan, the last entry to get released was Ys 3, Wanderers from Ys. And in the West we wouldn't have known what a mess things had turned into from there on, with the 4th entry being split into 2 different games, each with a completely different take on the same script, and the lesser of the 2 titles being made part of the official canon moving forward. Followed by Ys 5, which to this day is often considered a black mark against the series, even over Mask of the Sun. Likely more so because of how long it'd take before Falcom would make another entry into the series, when they finally felt confident enough to move beyond bomb combat. With Ys 6, 2 console generations later, they either had to revive the franchise or accept it wasn't going to work anymore. It was time to go big or go home, and Falcom went big.
That's great.
Ladak's the captain here, and he's my dad. 2 years ago, he let me board this ship, the Tremar. I wanted to see the world, because if I didn't, I would never catch up to that certain someone.
Okay, hold up, no, we don't talk about the Konami PlayStation 2 CG on this channel. Let's do this again. Falcom went big. Now, I could play into the mystery on what my stance towards this game is, but we've already covered a game in this engine with the modern take on Ys 3, The Oath in Valgana. Not only that, but if this game hadn't been any good, we likely wouldn't have had a series to discuss at this point, so there's no real reason to hold anyone in suspense about whether or not this is a good entry. While the Ark of Napishtim might not be my favorite of the 3 titles in its engine, it's still a classic in its own right. So with that said, let's actually talk about the game itself as we follow Adol's journey into Canaan in Ys 6, the Ark of Napishtim. In Ys 6, Adol is, as is often the case, shipwrecked on an island somewhere in uncharted waters, having been chased by the Roman army. He was flung overboard and sucked into a vortex before waking up in a small village inhabited by the Rita, a pointy-eared tribe living in wooden huts in the middle of a jungle. The Rita take a liking to Adol even though they're generally at odds with the other people who wash up on their shores, and he soon finds out there's a whole town of people from Eresia who, just like him, got sucked into the vortex and are now stuck on an island with no way out. Instead of trying to escape, they make peace with being stuck and try to make a decent living for themselves out here, building houses from the only stone that they could get their hands on, which are the ruins left by the ancestors of the Rita. It doesn't take long before the conflicts between the 2 sides not only escalates, but also gets overshadowed as Adol and his adventures do the thing that they always do. I don't want to spoil it too much, because it is a really fun story, and looking up how much Xseed has given away with their own marketing, I do think that one thing that is safe to say is that this game ends up being a better way to tie most of Adol's previous adventures together than both iterations of Ys 4 were, as the story of a certain winged race is brought into question yet again. In fact, it did such a good job that a chunk of the modern remakes retooled their story specifically to fit the narrative of the Ark of Napishtim better. All in all, I think that's a net positive, as Adol's journey has had more of a purpose since then, with even Ys 3's story tying directly into it now. In a lot of ways, the story is set up with the intent of both being refreshing and familiar at the same time, with a lot of the events and setup following patterns of previous titles. We have an arrogant rival who is hostile because he's afraid your interference will only make the situation worse. An island locked off from the rest of the world due to mysterious weather surrounding the place. Adol gets washed ashore at the start, Dogi crushes a wall, 2 blue-haired girls show up, but it presents everything in a unique and fun way with some good twists and turns to keep events interesting. The gameplay is where Ys 6 really shines though. In a lot of ways, it's very clear that Ys 5 was attempting to lay down the basics for a lot of what ended up happening in Ys 6, but it never quite made it work. Ys 5 had the regular action RPG combat, magic imbued into weapons with a charge mechanic, items used from menus, and a more traditional style of having the story unfold. Quite a lot of that is back now, but much more fluid and well thought out. Combat is a blast with a good fast pace to it. It's not quite the speed that it is in Oath and Felghana, though a direct comparison wouldn't be fair as that game was made later, using what worked in Ark of Napishtim as a basis. There's no boost mode and there are no potions with passive buffs or automatically consumed health drops in this game, which can make the combat feel a bit basic if that's what you're used to. Thankfully, these things weren't the only reason that Oath was a blast to play, since the basis for the combat is solid enough to feel satisfying without the need of these things. Plus it has some good ideas of its own, like let's save that for later. Like the 3-weapon system. Ark of Napishtim gives you 3 main swords that you use throughout the entire game. Livart, the blue one, which deals wind damage. Blaironte, the red one, which deals fire damage. Erysil, the gold one, which deals lightning damage. The color and elemental damage aren't the only change, as the 3 weapons all have slightly different attack speed, range, and do a different elemental spell attack. Instead of a boost meter, each of the 3 swords has their own magic meter that charges over time that can do a lot of damage when the meter is full. To make this better, you can charge a weapon fully, switch to another, charge that one, and switch back to the first again and still have a full meter. So you can have all 3 weapons charged and ready to go separately from each other. Whether you prefer this compared to the boost meter is up to you, but it is something that can absolutely melt bosses if you go in fully prepared with all 3 weapons. The downside to this is that if you want to use this, you often have to wait for all 3 weapons to charge before going into a fight if you want to go in fully prepared. Both of these reasons are probably why Oath and Felghana resets your boost meter before going into a boss fight, so you don't trivialize it with a fully charged meter. All 3 of these weapons can be upgraded 10 times at a blacksmith in trade of a special ore that all enemies drop, increasing their damage output, adding a special property to their regular attacks, and letting you charge your spells faster. It's nothing too spectacular, but it is a nice system to have in place. The ore itself, of course, is a large part of the story, as it has, much like in Ys 1 and 2, special magical properties that tie into the mystery of the island. It's a good way to tie the old games together more directly. Besides your swords, you have your typical armor and shield slots, which you can't upgrade this time around. And accessory slots, which you gain more of over time. Both slots and accessories, obviously. I think a number of accessories are missable, but the important and most useful ones aren't, so unless you're a die-hard completionist, it's not too big of a deal. But if you are, you might want to look them up using a guide before progressing too far into the game. Some of the optional upgrades are also quite out of the way, and there are a few dropped from special side bosses out in the overworld that have a second, stronger version of themselves appear later with a second reward. If you end up missing things without using a guide, I really cannot blame you. Boss fights are a joy. Every time I come back to the games on this engine, I'm reminded just how much I enjoy fighting them again. They're usually fairly simple patterns you have to read through and exploit, but there's something so satisfying to the high-speed boss battles of a good Ys game that it especially turned out great in the titles on this engine, and the first game on it is absolutely no exception to this. Though the combat is not exactly perfect either. The biggest problem that I have with the Ark of Napishtim in general is the grind. Ys is kind of known for this in some circles, and I think most entries in the series it isn't justified, but with Ark of Napishtim it absolutely is. In most titles, if you feel like you're behind on EXP, you might need to level once, at most twice, to be able to do the next boss fight. And then even if you don't, you probably can still push through it if you're good enough at the fight. Ark of Napishtim on the other hand takes a different approach. If you're too low a level and it's time to grind, you straight up cannot do damage to enemies. Not just bosses, but regular enemies. With how aggressive the game can get about it, I spent time running around in areas trying to figure out where else I was supposed to be going, because the gap between whether or not I could actually deal damage to enemies or if swings were bouncing off them with no damage dealt was way too aggressive in almost every area that I got into. And frequently enough, I'd get to a point where I could kill enemies in 1 or 2 swings no problem before one screen over, half the enemies wouldn't take damage anymore. There's a few cases where you need special items or equipment to do damage, but most of the time the answer was just a straight up grind, and as someone who tends to be averse to that, it's quite the problem. The only thing I can say in the game's favor regarding that, as there really is no way around it, is that at least the combat is fun enough to not make grinding feel too tedious. And there's often enough side content to explore and find in areas to not make the grind feel entirely aimless unless you really make it that way. The map structure in E6 is a bit more open than other games in this engine, and you do get a nice feeling of being allowed to actually explore a big area because of it. There's often side branches and things hidden outside of any main path, so there's enough to explore besides the direction you're supposed to go in. I guess that's one of the key differences of not having your level design based on a side-scroller or a tower that can only go up or down, but an island instead. There's also the way the game deals with healing items, which is probably the worst of any of the modern titles. There's 6 different healing items that enemies can drop or can be bought in stores. You can hold up to 9 of these and select them from your menu to heal at any time. Boss fights do lock you out of your menu, prohibiting you from accessing these items, but you can equip any item for use with a button outside of that menu, so if you really want to cheese a boss, you're entirely capable of getting whatever item you need to heal back to max health and take 9 of those with you into the fight. I don't have footage of this because I didn't even realize that this was a thing you could do until the very end, and even by then, I really didn't like this idea of doing that. I'm already not too fond of games where you're allowed to take 1 healing herb with you into the boss fight, let alone being able to take 9 of them. The boss fights are not exactly balanced around this, as they're all perfectly doable with a regular health bar if you're at the appropriate level to face them. And if you're not, you probably won't be doing damage to them anyway. Then there's the dash jumping, which is probably one of the things even the biggest defenders of E6 will never defend. Dash jumping is a special jumping technique in which you press a direction you're already facing once, and then pressing jump and attack together at the same time shortly after. The timing is fairly precise, and the feeling of inputs is pretty unnatural for what you're doing, and you're often expected to do this in situations that require precision. It's not something you need to do to beat the game, you can go the whole game without ever touching it, but if you want everything, you're going to have to get used to using it a few times just to get that disappointing item that wasn't worth the hassle. If there's something that didn't come back in later titles where I'm glad it didn't, this is it. On the other hand, there's something from previous games that came back in this version that I played that wasn't in the original E6 release that I am very thankful for. Originally, the game did not feature quick travel. It's a feature that Xseed added in the PC version, and god is it something that I possibly couldn't do without anymore now that it's here. Being able to just teleport from one area to the other is such a great thing to have, especially when backtracking is as heavy as it is in E6. Something that I think is often overlooked is that the 3-weapon system is kind of the start of what Falcom would later use for team members in the later 3D titles. Switching between 3 different weapon types, each color-coded, with unique attacks dealing extra damage to enemies is pretty much the basis for how those games incentivize you to switch between active party members in an effort to make combat feel less repetitive as the length of the games has increased over time. Now, I'm not opposed to the later team-based Ys titles, so I see this and go, huh, neat. I didn't notice that until I went back. Though I guess this is also why Dana's dungeon in Ys 8 reminds me of Unica's gameplay in Ys Origin. I just never realized how early they were trying to establish this kind of gameplay. As you can probably tell by playing through the video so far, the music has a bit of a different feel to it compared to most of the rest of the series. There's a bit more of a synthy sound, with some more focus on horns and flutes instead of the guitar and violin sounds that the series is known for, especially now. That isn't to say that the music doesn't fit the game, or even the series. Not at all, it's a really good soundtrack, but it has a very unmistakable quality to it where you can immediately hear it's from this game in particular, and I like it. There are some really great tracks in this game in general. All in all, Adol's 6th adventure is a strong one, and it was strong enough to bring the series back into prominence. The ending, as always, does a lot of good with the early setup and casts an interesting shadow over the events of other titles in the series, although this time, it comes with some heavy retcons regarding the state of the world. It's the one thing that makes a lot of people feel unsure about the implications at the end of Ys 8, though maybe with the recent announcement of Ys 9 taking place directly after it, maybe we'll get some answers regarding that. Thanks for bringing this being in development to attention... me. Huh, okay. Thanks for that, Twinfinite. Anyway, this was AboveUp. I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, I am going to immediately start on E7 just to have the mainline series done. It's not that I want to rush through it, but I want to get to the end before the end of the year, and I still have another game to do before then, and maybe even the other one. You know, the other one that came out while I was working on all these videos. If you like this video, maybe leave a like or even subscribe. As always, this video has been brought to you by the people on Patreon, who you see scrolling on the screen right now. If you'd like to see more videos like this, maybe consider pledging on Patreon at patreon.com/AboveUp, and I'll see ya.